But if you join me in the blessing over the reading of the Torah, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bakar banu mikol hamid v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who chose us from all the peoples and gave to us his Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord, the giver of the Torah. Amen. Amen. Today's parashah is Mishpatim. So it's Exodus 21 to 24:18. I'm gonna start reading in verse 21, or I'm sorry, chapter 21, verse 1. So if you would like to follow along, let me, I got a feedback coming in, so let me, I muted you, hon. Okay, chapter 21, verse 1. Now these are the ordinances which you are to set before them. If you buy a Hebrew slave, he shall serve for 6 years, but on the seventh he shall go out as a free man without payment. If he comes alone, he shall go out alone. If he is the husband of a wife, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master gives him a wife, and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall belong to her master, and he shall go out alone. But if the slave plainly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out as a free man, then the master shall bring him to God, then he shall bring him to the door of the doorpost, and the master shall pierce his ear, and he shall serve him permanently. If the man sells his daughter as a female slave, she is not to go free as the male slaves do. If she is displeasing in the eyes of her master, who designated her for himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He does not have authority to sell her to a foreign people because of his unfairness to her. If he designates her for his son, he shall deal with her according to the customs of the daughter. If he takes to himself another woman, he may not reduce her food, her clothing, or any of her rights. If he will not do these three things for her, then she shall go out for nothing without payment of money. Now let's skip over to 22. And in 22, it says in verse 1, if a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall pay 5 oxen for the ox and the 4 sheep for the sheep. If the thief is caught while breaking in and is struck so he dies, there will be no blood guiltness on his account. But if the sun has risen on him, there will be blood guiltness on his account. He shall surely make restitution. If he owns nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If what he stole is actually found alive in his possession, whether an ox or a donkey or a sheep, he shall pay double. And then it goes on. And I want to go on to chapter 23, and I'm going to start in verse 14. 3 times a year you shall celebrate a feast to me. You shall observe the feast of unleavened bread. For 7 days you are to eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you, at the appointed time in the month Abib. For in it you came out of Egypt, and none shall appear before me empty-handed. Thank you. Also, you shall observe the feast of harvest, of the first fruits of your labors, from what you sow in the field, Also the feast of the ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in the fruit of your labors from the field. 3 times a year all your males shall appear before the Lord God. You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread, nor is the fat of my feast to remain overnight until morning. You shall bring the choice fruit, first fruits of your soil into the house of the Lord your God. You are not to boil a young goat in the milk of its mother. Now let's skip over to chapter 24. And in chapter 24, then he said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and you shall worship at a distance. Moses alone, however, shall come near to the Lord, but they shall not come near, nor shall the people come up with him. Then Moses came and recounted to the people all the words of the Lord and all the ordinances, and all the people answered with one voice and said, all the words which the Lord has spoken, we will do. Moses wrote down all the words of the Lord. Then he arose early in the morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. And we'll stop right there if you join me in the blessing after the reading of the Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata botekanu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Amen. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who gave us the Torah of truth and planted everlasting life within us. Blessed are you, O Lord, the giver of the Torah. Amen. Amen. There is a lot here, everybody.
No.
If you read this portion, you will see. You know, I know that years ago, when I used to read the book of Numbers, you know, and it says, so-and-so beget so-and-so, and so-and-so this, and just went on and on and on. Boy, I'd be yawning halfway through it, and it just didn't interest me at that time. When we became a Messianic congregation, and we really started diving into it, boy, there is so much there, you know. Well, I think laws and ordinances and, you know, some people would say, that just doesn't interest me, you know. But in order for us to walk a righteous life, we need direction. And this is the direction that the Lord is giving us. Right here in this Mishpatim. In fact, in Mishpatim, let's just do the first fill-in right away. Mishpatim, rulings, laws, judgments, or ordinances. I know I have the New American Standard right here in front of me, and it does say ordinances. So yours might say something a little different, but the fill-in is ordinances. Go ahead, Tila.
I was reading this last night. It's the first time it's ever come to me. When this is this written primarily to men? Because everything there, the women isn't going to.
Go ahead.
The women.
Let me put my foot in my mouth. No.
Well, no, I mean, it's the first time I've ever thought about it. I mean, and this was late in the morning that I was reading this, you know, like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I start reading and I go, you know what, wait a minute. It sounds like he said it's been written so the men would know what they were supposed to do. I don't see anything in here that, you know.
For women?
Well, not quite. I don't want to say that exactly, okay? But I'm saying the majority.
And you're right. It sounds like it is, but it's not. It's for both men and women. There is one law in here that talks about the sorcerer or
Yeah,
the
yeah,
witch.
sorceress, yeah.
Okay, now that may sound like all he's doing is talking to women, but no, he's not. He's talking because there's men and women, both can be just as evil. So, no,
Oh, I don't know.
you started something, Tila. Pastor Paul, go ahead and jump in.
What I would say about this is, yes, it is primarily written to men because who are the priests in the household?
Yeah.
And it's always the firstborn male. And so the male is responsible to teach all of the people in the family. It doesn't mean everybody else in the family is not responsible. It's just this is given to this head of the family, and he's responsible to teach everybody else.
Thank you. Go ahead, Bill. You have your microphone?
Your microphone.
To try and explain how this works, Sharon and I have been married going on 52 years.
Really?
51, okay. But we made an agreement right in the beginning that all the major decisions would go to me, and all the minor decisions would go to her. So we had it divided up. And in 51 years, there hasn't been one major decision for me to deal with.
Bill, I like that. See, I was telling Bill earlier, I said, Peggy and I said, we just keep getting closer and closer, but then you keep getting further and further ahead, which is all right. Because Peggy and I, it's 49 years for us this week. Yeah, this week. So we're excited about that, and we'll just get away for a few days and then be back up here on Shabbat. But it's wonderful. But I know what you're saying, because I know when Peggy and I got married, everything, it was like, you become one. So we never said, this is yours and this is mine. This is ours. And it's always been that way. And even in the decision making, our decisions are made even together. And be careful, because if you make a decision and you're not together on it, it's going to come back to bite you in the rear. Because I did that recently. Oh, I have a
49 years,
But I'm telling you, I was at the mall and I decided I'm going to get a battery and put it in my, for a 10-year-old phone. So I did. I went over. Yeah, the battery works fine and everything like that. But then Hanukkah comes around and I get this gift, and it's a brand new i13 Pro?
I-13.
Yeah, Pro. And then it dawned on me. Now I know why she was ticked off with me. I should have spoken to her.
$80 for a battery.
Is that old too soon and smart too late?
Yep. No, I've got it there because I already know when you have 18 grandchildren, somebody is going to need a phone. Oh, absolutely.
Nice save.
Yeah, but they want the 13.
You know what? You're absolutely right. Because I already got that. Grandpa, why don't you keep the one you put the battery in and give me the no. Because I don't know how to use it anyway. Aiden helped me out yesterday, and he's only, how old is Aiden? 11? Yeah. Yeah. So you're absolutely right, Bill. Thanks for sharing that, because you do a good job there, Sharon. Okay, everybody, welcome to today's Torah study. Like I said, this morning we will be going through the Parashah Mishpatim. When you add an "im" to any word, what does that do? It becomes plural. So there are many laws in here that we're going to cover. In fact, this parashah is going to have the most laws of any parashah in Torah. Mishpatim is defined as rules or rulings, laws, judgments, or ordinances. Depending on the Bible translation you have, it's going to be one of these. In the previous parashah, Jethro, Moses took the nation of Israel to the base of Mount Sinai. And then, if you recall, thunder and lightning, smoke, fire, the Lord descended upon the mountain, and he loudly recited the 10 commandments, the 10 instructions, or the 10 statements. I think statements is probably the best, what am I trying to say? The words, yeah, the best way to put it. Do you realize that there are pastors out there that believe that that's all the Lord gave was 10 commandments?
And that's the reason why the first word should be in instead of now.
I'm going to get there.
Okay.
You are absolutely right. The people were so afraid that they begged Moses to go before God and bring back to them whatever the Lord wants to give them. That's so. I mean, I've heard Pastor Bruce and Paul and in this congregation get up in front of the pulpit and they'll really get loud. It's not like, hey, settle down. Yeah, Now I could imagine what it would have been like to be before the Lord. Okay, it's loud, but it's okay. He's got our attention. But the God of all creation is speaking to them there, and they shrank back in fear. Well, Moses did go before God on behalf of the people. And in this parashah, Moses delivers part of what God had spoken to them. This parashah contains 53 of the 613 mitzvot of the entire Torah. You know what I need, Peggy, is a pen. And that's going to come out to 11.5% of all the commandments. Go ahead, Colette. There should be.
Here, I have a pen. I have one.
I got one, Peggy. Thank you.
So if the Lord had only meant to continue in his giving of the words or the matters, how is it that later on they were referenced as a 10, as a decalogue? Because after this passage it says, that the words of the covenant, these 10 commandments, or
Right.
another one where it references the 10. It doesn't reference, the first 10 of all the ones I wanted to give you.
Well, I know the rabbis say that the 613 are wrapped into the original 10. They or 603, I'm sorry. 603 are wrapped into the 10 to come out to 613. But the other thing I used to have a problem with too, Colette, is people saying that Torah was given at Mount Sinai. But yet, if you go back to Genesis, they already knew about the Shabbat. They already knew about the offerings that are going to be brought before the Lord. So there's things like that. It's like maybe this is where he finally gathered all the people together to give it to them. But there was already acknowledgement, even when they went into Egypt, about Torah. Go ahead,
I would
Colette.
say that those 10 also were the ones that fit on the back and the front and the back of the tablets.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like he was going to put all of the commandments. He would give them all the judgments, the ordinances. But these 10 are very set apart. I mean,
Amen.
they're all set apart, but these are set apart from the set apart.
Yep.
And I feel like if you want to violate any one of these, you're really off base.
Oh,
as in trying to
absolutely.
move the immovable from the seventh day to the first day.
And you say that the front and the back, and that's one thing that everybody here probably knows, that when he brought the tablets out, the commandments or the statements, they were on front and back of the stones. you know, because I know that, I don't know how many of you have a real nice little, you know, two rocks at home with the tablets only written on the front, you know. It's a nice little dust collector, but go ahead, Pastor Paul.
For the 10 words, 10 statements, basically, when you look at what they are, they're the philosophical and ethical basis for all the rest of the commandments, all the rest of the directives. They're not even actually, they're part of, because it's a continuation,
Yes.
but they are the foundational for everything else that's added on. Every one of the other 603 always refers back to one of the first 10 words that are given.
Yes.
And it builds on that.
Have any of you ever made I remember bringing it in one time, it was years ago, but have any of you ever got all 613 together to look at all of them? Yeah, because I know I have.
I got a whole list of them.
Yeah, I still have my list too. And, you know, if anybody wants me to bring in the list, I can make copies, but it's, you know, it's amazing how you go through all of them and you could see and, oh yeah, I remember that one. I remember reading about this one. And it's like you said, it seems like all of them go right back to the 10. Go ahead.
You can actually.
Colette, you go first.
I was waiting for the other whoever. I was also going to make mention of the fact that even those 10 are subordinate to 2. I had one time, well, I did children's ministry for many years, and one time I had, everyone had a craft, and it was on 2 hangers. I brought a bunch of hangers in, and I had each one get 2 hangers. And one hanger, we put love the Lord your God with all of your heart, so love God, and the other one we put love your neighbor.
Mm-hmm.
And then we hung one, you know, part of the commandments on one and then part of the 10 commandments on the other. But it was to illustrate to them that all the laws, all of the commandments of God hang on those 2.
Right,
And
that's
then
good.
hanging on those 2 are everything else.
Amen.
And that was kind of a way to illustrate to, you know, to the class that was teaching that day.
Amen. That, Maria?
Over 1/3 of those 600 pertain to the temple.
Yes.
But what I wanted to ask was, why, if they were connected to the 10 Commandments, they were put outside of the ark instead of inside?
You know, I didn't study that part out, but I remember we covered that once before.
And
At
I
a,
asked it before.
oh, okay, and you didn't get an answer?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, she says I didn't, so.
Oh.
They couldn't fit all the stones inside.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but she's absolutely right. There's a verse in there that says that they were outside of the ark. So, you know, why outside the ark? My answer would be they're there for the people to see it.
Exactly.
You know.
They're in the Holy of
exactly
Holies.
That's, yeah.
It's in the Holy of Holies. The people can't.
No, but when they're walking through the wilderness, it couldn't be in the Holy of Holies.
Floating outside the ark.
Well, they couldn't be inside.
But that's what I would suggest. It may be just you know they're there for the people, not just the priest.
So they weren't just floating in the air.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Sharon.
I always thought that the 603 were instructing us how to do the 10. I mean, what is covered in the 10? How do you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength?
Yeah.
And how do you honor your father and mother?
Right.
What does it mean not to steal?
Right.
Is that limited, or is that to everybody? Or
Right.
So, to me, I always thought they were very closely tied together, and our instruction how to fulfill the 10 Commandments.
Yep. And I've always thought that too, that all the commandments are for all of us. But like you said, there are commandments there that are only temple observant. There's commandments that are only for the women, commandments only for the priests. So and commandments that are only for the land. So and that's one thing we're going to see with some of these commandments that we are going to cover. We won't cover all 53, but we will cover some. And if there's one there that you want to talk about, you could bring it up. But let me move on. This Torah portion has the most of any Torah portion. Most Bibles begin with now. I'm going to get to what Pastor Paul said earlier. So if you might have, when you get to verse 1 of chapter 21, it might say, now these are the ordinances, or these are the rulings. Or you might have something that says, or here are the rulings or ordinances. And then some translations will simply start with, these are the, and then it goes on. But the most accurate word that should be there, and I don't even have it in mind, but the Humash N. That is the most accurate word that should be there. And why would it say N? A-N-D. Because it's a continuance of the 10. When he gave the 10, now he's continuing. So N, and this is for the people. Our Lord did not stop at 10. There are many more rulings that God wanted his people to observe. So in Exodus 19:8, the Israelites with all their heart and soul said, and that the Lord said, all that the Lord has said we will do. In other words, the Israelites said yes. Go ahead, Colette.
I understand what you're saying about it starting with and, but literally, Vav is the most used letter in the Torah because everything starts with and. I mean, like, it's a connective participle. So, I mean,
Right.
like, how, if it didn't start with an and, I'd be surprised.
And and you're right, because we're fortunate. We have Bibles that we have chapters and we go to verse this, but in reality, it's just all one book. It just continues, and continues. So,
Viela is the word that's there.
What's that?
Viela?
Viela?
Yeah, that's the word. And it literally means just what we're talking about. It is, and it's a continuation.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's the whole point. This is where the Christian community has used a different word, and why they can say the 10 Commandments we keep and we do, except for the fourth one.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we keep the 10, and it's separated from all the rest because all the rest have to do with the temple. They have
Right.
to do with this. They have to do with that, and we're not subject to that. But
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
technically, they're wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. Peggy and I are going to go listen to a speaker from Israel and this week. And the thing is, he's going to be appearing at a Christian church. So, and I've always wondered, why doesn't maybe he does, and we just don't know about it. But, why doesn't he relay to the pastor there that the Sabbath, Amari, what's his name? Amir Safari. Yeah. So he's good. I like him. But that's the only thing. I just, they feel that, yeah, he may have. So go ahead, Maria.
Even though there's 1/3 of the 600 are supposed to be temple related, aren't we supposed to keep them if we are supposed to be the temple of God?
But without,
You sacrifice a lamb to yourself.
The sacrifice, like it says in the Bible, is the sacrifice of my
praise.
lips.
Yeah.
There.
No, there's some, there's some that are so temple dependent, we are unable to do it. So go ahead, Sharon.
Well, these are the civil ordinances, and they're for the land of Israel. If you are in the land of Israel, these are the laws that you have to keep, and that's we feel that we should also do it outside the land because we've been grafted in. But technically, it's for the land of Israel.
Well, our country was founded under these principles. This is what we wanted in this country. A small group of people came from countries that they were so, they were in bondage, really. So it's like coming in to a new country that we want what Israel has. So I just, I think that, they're for all of us. They're for all of us, but there's just, like I said, there's some ordinances there that are just for the women. But one thing I do believe, that there are some commandments that us men are unable to keep, but the women can, but we get credit for it because we are all one family. So, and it may be the same thing. You might have hit on something there, Maria, about even though the temple doesn't exist, we can do the best that we can to keep that mitzvah. Go ahead, Colette.
I was also going to say these, every parashah we name them by the first unique word.
Yep.
Right? So the first unique word here is the Mishpatim.
Yes.
Before that, there's other words, other very common words that are used in lots of, beginning of lots of different sentences. That first word, it says, and these, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And then it talks about these are the Mishpatim. When it talks about the 10 commandments, in quotes, because they're not called commandments, they're called the words, the Devarim. So I wouldn't make the case that these and these, which are the Mishpatim, are the same or a continuation of these, which are the 10 Devarim.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I think that they really are, they're not separate in the fact that we are made to observe, but like what Sharon says, these Mishpatim, or these ordinances, are for you to understand how to live here, because you're about to, they would have gone in, but.
And as we've heard so many times, it's our choice. The Midrash speaks of God's offering the Torah to the Ishmaelites, but they heard thou shalt not steal, and that was a practice. It was a practice for them to go out and take things, whatever they wanted. So thou shalt not steal didn't work for them. What the Midrash says is they turned it down. No, give it to somebody else. It says in the Midrash that the Lord took it to all 70 nations, but there was only one that accepted it, and it was the smallest of all the nations, and that was the Hebrews, that was the Jews. So, the other nations, they worshipped idols, so they too would not accept Torah.
Remember the rabbis that said that.
It's the rabbis that say that. You're absolutely right. So here we are. We're just about we're over 4 months after the first Passover. Moses gathers the people at the foot of Mount Sinai, and he will tell them what God had told him to say. The first commandment that we read here in this Torah portion is how a slave should be treated. So in fact, in case it should happen, it speaks of a Hebrew slave. Now verse 21:2 begins with when, but in the Hebrew, the verse is more likely to read this way: if you acquire a slave. Have you ever thought, why does this parashah begin with slavery? The rabbis say it's because the Israelites were slaves themselves. And God did not want them to treat slaves the way they were treated in Egypt. You know, at the time this command was given, there were no slaves in the camp. So you might think about it, well, why talk about slavery? You know, because all there were in the camp at that time were just free people. God knew a time would come when slavery would be socially tolerated. So if an Israelite had a slave, that slave would be treated in a humane and orderly manner. You know, I mean, I guess everybody here knows it, but it's, you know, it's not surprising. There's still slavery going on today, all these years later, you know. So, unfortunately, you may ask, why is Torah allowing slavery of any kind? And that's a good question. The Torah is actually against slavery. The 8th commandment is do not steal. If we think about the beginnings of the United States, all the slaves brought here were basically kidnapped. They were stolen.
Verse 16.
Verse 16 of this chapter makes kidnapping a capital crime. Okay? There are some forms of slavery that the Torah did not ban, and we're going to get into that. But when you think about slavery in the United States, there were some landowners who had slaves, and they would tell you, we didn't bring them across. They're just here, so we purchased them. So that let them loose of any, they didn't do any crime according to Torah, right? Wrong. Yes, they did. When they purchased these slaves, it was just as though they were bringing these slaves across the ocean into the land. You know, so it was, you know, it's something, when you look back into our history, it's something I'm very proud of, that it was abolished, though there were many who did not want to abolish it. You know, we don't need anything like this, but we weren't the first country to abolish slavery. England, yeah. So,
We actually got our slaves from black slavers.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. They would sell their own people into slavery, you know. Kind of like what we're going to read in the last days, where families are going to sell their, or not sell, we're going to turn in their parents, and parents will turn in their children. But that's a whole nother story. Go ahead, Pastor Paul.
You know, we talk about slavery, and we always take it back to the black community that came from Africa. Long after the African situation was dealt with, whether we say it was completely dealt with or not, we can argue that forever. But the Industrial Revolution was also all about slavery, because companies owned people. And truthfully, in West Virginia, the coal mine situation, they owned those people. We used to sing a song, you know, St. Peter don't come because I can't go, I owe my soul to the company store.
Yep.
That was still a reality, and if we stop and think about it, even right today, everybody that has a mortgage, if you are indebted, are you not also considered in slavery? And see, I mean, you know, it's just, we think in terms of this small slice
Right.
of what slavery is, but God looks at it a little bit differently. You
Yeah.
know, and so in our society, it's acceptable to owe, you know, because we're paying, etc. But the truth is, stop paying for a payment or two, and you'll find out whether you own it or don't.
Yeah, and see who's knocking on your door. You know, before I go on with, I've got two, let me give you letter A. Letter A, 53 commandments in this parashah. I'm using commandments there usually, but you're right, 53 statements or ordinances or instructions. In letter B, the Israelites received the Torah at Mount Sinai. Okay, Pastor Bruce, you were first.
I was just gonna say, in regards to modern day slavery, we're obviously all aware of the sex slave trade, which is just huge business in the world today. But even beyond that, with technology, the entire cancel culture is slavery. If you do or say something that big tech doesn't like,
Yeah, you're right.
You're dealt with, or removed. You're canceled, and it's comparative to being executed, and that'll be the next step, of course.
Yeah.
Only whites could be
So-
racist.
Yeah, I know, but it's really, we're heading headlong into, that's what the whole New World Order is all about, is slavery. The elites control you and everything. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy.
Or else.
Or else, yeah. Okay, Colette.
I, for some reason, have been doing a deep dive into modern day slavery.
Uh-huh.
This morning, my dive sent me to the chocolate industry. And every industry, like a few days ago, was a company store thing. Today it was about chocolate. Every industry has a sourcing of things. Just like the African slave trade was about labor to get certain commodities processed.
Right.
From that process of it being on the plantation all the way to it getting on your table. So the fact that we're using sugar all the time now, like they talk about the statistics on sugar, back in the day, that was like, who got sugar? Because it was so expensive. I mean, the labor and everything that was required to get that commodity on your table was prohibitive for most people to be able to purchase it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they were talking about cheap chocolate now. And how is it cheap? It's because of, here's the process it's all used to get to your, to your yummy whatever. And so now I'm like, dang, chocolate, you know what I'm saying? It's where you have to start making decisions about the kind of lifestyle you want to live, and if you want to be participating in this industrial complex, or if you're going to bow out and say, you know what, I have a different lifestyle based on the quality of life, not just for me, but other people on the planet. So that's just, like I said, I've been starting to do the deep dive. It's not like I've gotten all the way into it, but the more I get into it, I'm like, ooh, God, that's really nasty, you know?
I get...
What does he want us to do about it?
Yeah.
Not just, oh, that's horrible, but like, Lord, now what do I do? Type of thing, so.
I read some of the thing. Yep. I read some of that, and then what happens, oh my gosh, it's so depressing. Let me go on to something else.
How about Greta for president?
Who?
Greta.
Greta?
Thunberg or whatever.
Yeah. Anything? Oh, jeez.
I hope world chancellor, by the time she gets the position, that's it. That's going to be the end of it.
Yeah.
We're all slavefuls.
No, we're all gone, because 10 years are up.
Oh, there you go.
Go ahead, Janie.
About the slavery issue, it is commonplace here in America still, the slavery issue. It's just presented in more subtle ways sometimes. My girlfriend was telling me, who does research like Colette does, was talking about the Nike shoe industry. And there's all sorts of things like that that are owned, operated, and perpetrated by slavery issues. But
Right.
if we think about what the word says, we know that the devil has no new plans. He's not creative. He just does the same thing over and over and over again in every generation. And so for us to think that our laws or our mandates, man-made mandates, would obliterate such horrid things as slavery, we're just simply blind to the fact that Satan is still working through people to do such atrocities.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Go ahead, Maria.
See, the government is more wiser than we are. They say, don't go to school, don't even go to work, and I'll send you money. Stay home, do nothing, just vegetate. Don't think, we'll think for you, and we'll send you money we'll take care of you. One day they're gonna wake up and they're gonna find out they're slaves.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, let's move on. There were 3 types of people who could become a Hebrew slave: a poor person, a person who owes a debt, and a thief. If a person was so poor he could become a slave for room and board, and that's what would happen, and food and clothing. A person who could not pay off his loan would be able to work it off as a slave until his debt was paid in full. A thief could become a slave to pay back what he stole, and he would have to pay back double. So in verses 2 through 11, mention all the do's and the don'ts of the slaves. So let me give you a couple more. In Roman numeral 2, the Lord reminds the Israelites that they were slaves in Egypt. In chapter 20, now he explains slavery. And one thing we have to understand in letter A, slavery in Israel is much different than slavery in the pagan nations. So let me move on now. And there is a limit. I don't know if you were reading this Torah portion, there is a limit on how long a Hebrew can remain a slave. The limit is 6 years. After 6 years, he must be set free. It's funny, earlier today, I was telling some of the ladies here, yeah, Peggy and I were at 49 years. I said, and next year is 50. It's a jubilee. I could set her free. No. No. She'll smack me on the way. She'll probably take me to the car like this. You know?
Maybe you're the one.
But you know, one thing that was interesting reading on this is, according to the rabbis, the 6 years represent the 6,000 years. And when we get our freedom, so you know, that is that's interesting. If the man, and then remember when I read, it says if the man is single or alone when he becomes a slave, then he will go out single when he is freed. Okay? The man goes free and his wife and children belong to the master. I know it, I can't. That's exactly. When I read that, if I became a slave and they found me a wife and you married, you have children and everything, why would you want to go out? You know, yeah, we wouldn't. Colette, you go first.
You know, you have to think about these things, these terms economically also.
Yeah.
Because if you were well off enough or you had the resources to even have labor like this to work for you, you were in a better position to take care of someone than someone who didn't have those resources, who were just working a piece of land or had to indenture himself to somebody else. So if you were at the point where you had to indenture yourself to someone else just to work, number one, you had no business having no family and no kids. Just leave that alone until you're done with the debt or whatever it is. Just leave it alone until you're done. But if you're not going to leave it alone and you're just going to be like, okay, I'm going to have me a family, I'm going to do all that while I'm in this situation, I'm not feeling sorry for you. I'm not. I'm like, you need those people where they can get taken care of, because unless you have the resources to actually take care of a family, don't do it. Yeah. That's my opinion. Or stay in the situation because you like that better than being on your own, and you're going to stay there with the wife and kids. Yeah. I don't feel sorry for you.
That's a very modern day theology, like theory, like back then, the family was survival.
Use a mic.
That's a very modern thought process. Back then, family was survival. It wasn't just, because they were lonely or because they couldn't, stay warm by themselves. It was because it was a necessity to
Right.
survive.
Right.
If they worked the farms, everybody had a job to do. So, and that's not fair. You're so not fair, Colette. I'm sorry. Well, you have to have, there's love and relationships and family, and those are the things that bring joy to our lives. And so, and you never go into a situation thinking I'm not going to be able to sustain this. Things happen. So, don't be so mean.
You know what? I am not trying to be mean. I am just saying, listen,
Yeah,
when
we
you're
know.
in an economic position, because like you said, it's not about happy, warm, fuzzy feelings. People arrange marriages. Even part of this parasha is if you buy a woman. You don't buy a woman just to be like, oh, she's going to be working her butt off in a field somewhere. The women had a certain roles in the household.
Right.
So if you had a woman servant, it was for a purpose. And if you, for whatever reason, felt like she wasn't going to be in that position, you had to do a lot of things in order to discharge her to be in someone else's family. You just knew that was the person you were going to take care of to whenever.
Right.
So it's not warm and fuzzy, and it's not about it.
But you know what?
It's an economic thing at this point.
Yeah, Colette, but it can be warm and fuzzy, and it can be pretty well, straightforward too.
That was a secondary issue.
I'm looking at both of you, and today we ran across a person that we know that is down and out, but that person selected that. So we could have that idea that, you know what, you didn't have to be that way. There's plenty of work out there, but you selected to do this. Yeah, you chose it, exactly. So, but at the same time, we're feeling sorry, like, oh my gosh, because, what's wrong with you? You need a V8, But, okay, who is next? Bill?
Maria too.
Oh.
Phil was
No.
long after those other.
Go ahead, Bill. Oh, Maria too? All right.
I guess one mistake we have to be careful of, I used to use the Nehemiah passage where he's going to lay a hand on those people that were selling on the Sabbath in Jerusalem. And so does that mean I can go to the Subway store and punch the guy in the nose for selling on? A lot of the Bible is just recorded history.
Right.
It didn't God say go punch the guy in the nose because he's selling on the Sabbath. It showed that he was really passionate about it. But we don't put that in as law number 604. And so slavery is a big problem, but it wasn't in the garden.
Yeah.
So God's dealing with a fallen people that have been, now a couple thousand years into the fall.
Yeah. No, you're right. Okay. Were you first? Go ahead, Maria.
We have to remember the people when they were slaves and they were released. What were they released to? They weren't released to a home. They didn't have a house. They didn't have land. They didn't have a job. They had nothing.
Yeah.
So if they had a master that took care of him, gave him clothes, gave him a place to sleep, gave him food, light work, hey, we have slavery now. We don't call them slaves. We call them homeless.
But we have read in other Torah portions where if the slave is sent out, they are sent out with clothing, with money.
How long does that last?
Yeah, you're right. That's a Hebrew slave. You're right. Go ahead, Pastor Paul.
One other thing about this whole thing, just bring it into closer to our times. When England was sending the Celtics down to the Caribbean, we're talking about what are those people? And it's what I am, but I can't remember.
Irish?
Well, anyway,
Scottish?
People that are northern England, where they're not Scots, but
Good.
they're Europe.
Irish.
Irish, there you go. When the Irish were sent down to the Caribbean, they would, it's like, duh, I could have had to be here. When they were sent down, they were actually bred with blacks to create what we now call mulattoes. So, because the people from the north did not do well in the Caribbean, they would burn up in the fields. So they bred them on purpose to bring the black color into the whites. The whites were to be used primarily in the plantation buildings and the blacks in the field. Well, the blacks were much more valuable than the Irish, much more. So they bred them to kind of solidify the field. Well, when you go all the way back to the Bible, what we're talking, it is all economics. And the truth of it is, if you were bred with somebody, see, we put it in the context while you're married to them and you have children. Well, we made that choices ourselves because we really like the person somehow. But if you happen to be a slave and you're being bred to produce workers, you may not really like that situation as much as you might think. And so to be set free would be literally to be set free.
Right,
What
right.
you were set free to is absolutely true. You were set free if you happen to have a home and family, you could go back to that family. Or if that was gone, you were basically on the street.
Right,
And then you can make that choice, which is the whole thing Paul talks about.
right.
You take oil and drive it through the lobe of your ear, and you make yourself a bond slave to that situation, and then you
Right.
keep your wife and children per se. But we really have to catch the idea that we impose our understanding of marriage and life and happiness and children into a situation that may be absolutely not.
Right. Well, it's interesting here in verse 6, if a slave wants to remain a slave, just as Paul said, but he is brought before the judges. And the reason he's brought before the judges, it's like he wants to remain a slave, but he's brought before the judges so the judges can question him and say, is this what you want to do? It's not the master's decision that, because maybe he wants him to stay a slave. So he's brought before the judges at the doorpost. It's interesting, it's at the doorpost. Where was the blood put? All over the doorpost. The mezuzah is at the doorpost. So that's why they bring the slave to the doorpost. The mezuzah contains the verse in Deuteronomy 6:4-9, which is the Shema. And I think that's all we'll cover on slavery, but we'll go to Gary first.
I think we're spending the most amount of time in the aspect of slavery that's the least important, meaning the physical aspects of slavery. And I think we're missing the point that there is also emotional slavery. There is mental slavery, and most significantly, spiritual slavery. Like, I could be a slave to the premature conclusions and assumptions I was taught earlier, that if I hang on to those, I am a slave to those,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got to be willing to let go of that in order to be free of that. Or emotional slavery, where you're emotionally enslaved to another person
Mm-hmm.
and controlled or dominated, or mentally. We're spending a whole lot of time just on the physical stuff, which is what we get caught up on. And secondarily, when we use the term slavery, our only really basis for comparison is the slavery in this nation many years ago.
Right.
Whereas the concepts of slavery, as it's being discussed here, is a completely different concept, viewpoint, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Because in our country, it was based upon race. Back then, race had nothing to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we should focus more on the emotional, the mental, and especially the spiritual components of slavery.
Mhm. Well, that's something to look into. I just didn't. I just went straight to Torah and read what they have to say here on it. But I'll tell you one thing. I remember we had a speaker here. I don't think we'll ever have that speaker again. But but they covered slavery that's going on right now in Egypt, and it's the way what's going on at this time in Egypt is no different than what went on in the 1800s here in America, because they are treating their slaves, they are brutal with them. So, you know, I just don't want people to think that, hey, it's over now. You're talking about something way back then. Nope, it's still going on today. But let me give you a couple more fill-ins. B, Roman numeral 2b, slaves, servants were treated with respect. I'm talking about the Hebrew slaves of that time. Respect is the fill-in. In letter C, the slave would go free after 6 years or after paying off their debt.
And that's why it's the Shemitah. After 6 years, not in the 6 years.
Yeah, after 6 years. You're right. You're right. So, but then again, if you had a debt and it got paid off in full, you said, hey, you're going to come and you're going to work for me for 2 years to pay off that debt. Well, after the 2 years, then you're free to go. But so it was whatever the agreement was. But if there wasn't an agreement, after 6 years, the slaves were set free. Okay. Only the male. You're right.
And only
You're right.
Hebrew.
Yeah, and only the Hebrew. Now, I'm wondering, have you ever heard that there are sins that are more severe than others? Or have you always thought that every sin is just as bad as all the other? When, you know, sinning is being apart from God, so all sins are alike. But if you take notice, the punishment on some of the sins or disobedience are more severe than others. For instance, violent crimes such as murdering, kidnapping, and assault, premeditated murder, kidnapping and striking or cursing a parent, they all carried what penalty? The death penalty. Oh yeah, you're right. In Exodus 21:17 it says, and he who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. Somebody had their hand up? Nope.
Nah.
Bill? Okay. It wasn't important. It wasn't important, everybody. It was Bill.
Then I'll say,
Now he's gonna say.
Yeshua, I can't remember I'm trying to remember the reference, but he said it's going to be better for Sodom and Gomorrah on the judgment day
Yeah,
than for you,
you're right.
talking to some of the teachers of the
Yeah.
law. So
Yeah.
that suggests.
Yep. You know, and we wonder about this because what it says there is no recorded, anything recorded that we know of where a child got put to death for doing this, but it's in Torah. It's there.
We did it at night.
At night? Is that what is that what the rabbis say?
Otherwise, that never happened.
Yeah, they say it never happened. Yeah. Go
I
ahead,
found
Maria.
I found it interesting that it says, the commandment says, honor your father and your mother, but Yeshua says, love your enemy.
Yeah.
So does that mean I shouldn't love my mother?
No, of course you should love your
It
mother.
says honor,
Yeah.
doesn't say,
Yeah.
I know, but it, so many times when people say, I've been abused, and I can't love my parent because of the abuse that I got. And the answer always comes back, the commandment says you don't have to love them, but you have to honor them. But the
Right.
commandment says, love your enemies.
Yep. Yep. No, it sure does. Go ahead. Who? Pastor Paul was first.
Need that microphone. Yeah, one of the things that Yeshua said about that particular subject is when they came and he was teaching, and they said, hey, your mother and brother are outside.
Yeah, that's right.
And what did he say?
Yeah.
He said, very simply said, who is my mother and who are my brothers? He said, those that keep the commandments. So, we do have to consider the essence of what Yeshua was trying to bring across was the foundational principles we're talking about here. That's what he was about, to explain that.
Right.
So, it's like, you can say, okay, my mother did this, my father did that, and so I can't honor them or whatever, but it's the principle that really is the foundational thing.
Yep. Go ahead, Colette.
Yeah, I was gonna go back to those 10 words. When I was doing that crafted exercise with those students, we had hung 4 and 6, because that's the traditional Christian way of thinking about it. Love God is the first 4, love your neighbor is the last 6. But the more I've come to actually look at those words, I'm understanding that the rabbis who talk about it being 5 and 5, I believe are correct in their reckoning. When you look at that 5th commandment to honor your parents, like Maria said, you're not commanded to love them. It's an honoring of your parents. And I was listening to one rabbi. He was talking about how they actually parallel one another. 1 to 6, 2 to 7, 3 to 8, 4 to 9, and 5 to 10. So I started meditating, like, what does 5 and 10 have to do with one another? If you are coveting on one side, how do you love God? By honoring your parents. So just meditating on that for quite some time. And I came to realize, you know what? When you don't honor, you literally have no say in who your parents are, right? You come out of who you come out of. Like, you don't have a say in that. You pop out and you're there in that family. If they keep you in that family, like you're raised there, that's one thing. If they decide that you would be better off in another family and you're raised by them, that's another thing. But just the idea that your paternity and your maternity are not, they're just there. If you honor God, like if you love God, saying regardless of where I came from or how I got here, this is the way I got here and I have honor for that, is the same thing as not coveting. Your neighbor has his things. He came here the way he came. He had the opportunities he had. He now has the things he has, all the things that he has.
Right.
And for you to covet them, for you to covet their things and all their stuff, is to literally covet their life. Like, you want to be them, because that's how they got to be where they are and have what they have, because they are who they are.
Right.
And they've done what they've done. If you covet their stuff, it's like you saying, I want to be them.
Well, and
the other part is
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, the honoring the parents part is, I am who I am.
Right.
And this is how I started.
You see, I hear what you're saying. I come from a family of 14 kids. Yet, of all of us, there are some of us that didn't honor our parents. Didn't honor the parents like others did. So it's different. In fact, I used to have one of my siblings say that the only thing I'm looking forward from my dad is 3 days. I said, 3 days? What do you mean 3 days? Well, he was working at the time, and if my dad had passed away, he would have got 3 days bereavement. And I thought, well, that's sad, But like I said, we're in the same household, we're being raised the same way, but we have different perspectives or of honoring.
Didn't all have the same spirit.
We definitely didn't have the same spirit. You're right. Tila, you were first.
Well, I only can speak from experience, and this is why I love what the word says, because I did not have a good relationship with my dad. And when I became a Christian, one of the first things, and I heard it in school, okay, as far as, they had the 10 Commandments and so forth.
Right.
But I didn't accept any of that, okay? But when I became a Christian, I saw that I had to honor him.
Yeah.
And so I went before the Father and I asked the Father how to honor my father. But then, the more I read, then I had to love, okay? And he took me step by step, and that's why I think the word is so beautiful, because you're growing
Right.
in steps. And by by beginning the commandment of loving or honoring your mom and dad, it takes you into that love, respect. And then it takes you into a deeper, because where I thought he was my enemy, I could now love him.
I'm
You
in.
understand?
I'm in. I know, and I do understand that, because what do you have, Peggy?
I was just gonna say something before Bill.
All I was gonna say is, you honor your mother and father because they gave you life.
Yeah. And I understand what you're saying too, Tila, because there was a good, 25-year gap there between my dad and myself. That there was no relationship. I tried as I could to try to get a relationship going, but it wasn't until after his new wife, because it wasn't my mother. My mother passed away, but his new wife, once she passed away, all of a sudden things started clicking, and now my conversations with him is, I love you. He'll tell me that. I love you. Good, have a, good. Hush up. Okay, go ahead, Bill.
Give me a long ride home for you. One of the problems here, Pastor touched on it yesterday, and Gary touched on it a few weeks ago. The Greeks have like 7 words for love.
Uh-huh.
And the big 3 that we're familiar with are agape, phileo, and eros. And Yeshua, when he's talking to Peter, he said, do you agape me? Do you agape me? And then finally he says, do you even phileo me? And that's when Peter broke down.
Right.
Are you even my friend? So that's where we Sharon and I are very careful. We never use the word love in reference to a candy bar or a cup of coffee, or because we only have one word for it in our language. That's not right.
Yeah.
So when they say love, we're trying to understand it through one word, and it's more, the honor thing is more important. And Dennis Prager makes the statement, don't seek to be friends with your kids. If that happens, that's good, but make sure that you establish that parent-child relationship and that they respect you.
Amen.
And that's hard for us, because we want to have fun. We want our kids to love us. You know what I mean? So
Right.
agape phileo helps, I think, to understand.
Right. Were you going to say something, Gary?
I think we look at it a lot of times, like honoring mother and father, we think it in the terms of qualifiers. Like, do they deserve to be honored by virtue of their behavior, good or bad? As opposed to, as we are imagers of God, representatives of God on earth, our parents gave us the gift of life. We came through them. And it's not so much a matter about whether they deserve it or not. It is about our own character.
Right.
That we honor them, we show respect, whether they deserve it or not. It is a characterological development within ourselves, in that they are imagers of, to us, like God is, they're my parents, and God is like a parent. We honor them in the same fashion that we should honor God.
Mm-hmm.
Now, God obviously deserves it. Some parents may or may not.
Right.
But the point is, it is an issue of my own character to honor them in spite of whether they deserve it or not. You'll say, those are the hardest to love, are the ones that need it the most.
Yeah.
It's about me, not them.
Well, because when I think of how important it is to God that children respect their parents, what really bothers me is when I see children disrespecting their parents. Because, and I don't care if it's a young father and a young child, or if it's an older father and an older child, because we've seen that. And where the guy just, like, come on, old man, get moving, let's go, and it's like, come on, you wanna, yeah. It's like you wanna punch them out, you know, and.
It can be done out of love too, because I talked to her like that.
Yeah.
But it's out of love, you know?
You know, not going there.
Give her the.
It's just the way I talk to her sometimes.
Okay, Heidi, you go first, and then Colette.
I don't know if this is on. Is it on?
All you gotta do is press it up,
Okay,
and
there it is. It's very basic. I think we're trying to make it very hard here. The bottom line is if you cannot honor your parents, you cannot go outside that family and honor anyone. If you can't forgive your parents for whatever they've done, if you can't understand or try to get past or respect, then I can't trust you to love, honor, and respect me.
Yeah.
When this is
Good.
your original family, it's you have to get past that above all others.
yeah. Go ahead, Colette.
Yeah, I was gonna bring it back to the 10 words, because just like Gary said, and even Heidi was just saying, once you take it out of the category of it's loving others and put it into the category of this is loving God, you have more of a healthy fear of the Lord when it comes to that commandment,
Right.
and an honoring of where you come from and where you're allowing God to take you.
Right.
And that, I said, that understanding that, you know what, I think the rabbis are right on this. This is like a 5 and 5 issue. That was a better understanding, I believe, of God's word than us just saying, okay,
Amen.
I'm gonna just love my parents because, you know, that I'm supposed to love others. Bring it back into the first things first category, like what you were
Yeah.
saying. This is the first thing.
Yeah. You know, and I think this is a teaching tool too. If you honor your parents, or you know, your children are going to see that, and the grandchildren, because I know with Peggy and I, we've got such a good relationship, even with our grandchildren. You know, they're head over heels in love with their grandparents, and because, you know, they see this. It's just like our marriage, for instance. I get one of my grandsons who's, he's what, 26, our oldest ones are 26 or 27. Well, right in there. But they will say, like, with our marriage, that that's back in the olden days. You know, they don't do that anymore. I said, yes, they do. I say, you've got to be, you know, committed. But one thing we get, these 26, 27-year-olds, they're constantly calling us for advice and stuff like that. You know, that's what happens. You honor and you receive honor. So go ahead, Pastor Paul, and then I'll get you, Frank. You had a question too? Oh, okay.
Yeah, you know, we're looking at all of this, and what Gary's saying, everybody's saying is, this is a training ground.
Yeah.
And we're learning how actually to honor God. And he lets us honor our parents because they are representative of God.
Amen.
Especially when we're children and growing up. And then when we get older, you know, it's like we get a little smarter. We start seeing our parents as actually having something going on instead of, these are idiots, why don't they keep up with life, you know? But the thing is, the Mishpatim, this is the First Testament gospel.
Right.
This is the gospel that was given with all the instructions, and it's the good news. Mm-hmm. It really is the good news because God is revealing how to please him and how to live with everybody else. And the gospel that we look at saying, oh, it starts with Yeshua. Right. No, it didn't. It started right here. Yeah. This was the good news. It started here. We have Yeshua who brings it to fruition and says, okay, you can now, those of you, and this is where we really have to catch it. All of this was written to Israel. Mm-hmm. Every covenant is a covenant with Israel. They were already saved. This was not about salvation.
Right.
None of this does anything for salvation. Salvation was accomplished when God brought them out, and he said, you are my segula, my treasure. I have chosen you. You are my people. This is the way it is. That's a salvation issue.
Right.
All the rest is for us that are not part of that community. And so we get to join that community just like the slave
Right.
that was a pagan got to become a Hebrew slave. When you were a Hebrew slave, you had privileges and rights.
Yes.
As a pagan, you did not. And so when we today, those of us that aren't Jewish, aren't born and raised and et cetera, we join Israel through Messiah. And when we do, we become subject to the blessings of the covenant as well as the responsibilities.
Yes.
So the good news is submit, do what God has said, and it will go well with you.
Yep. You know, and I liked what, I think it was Pastor Bruce who brought it up yesterday at Shabbat, that, you know, I mean, we all have a wealth of knowledge, you know, but now our kids that are getting into their 30s or, you know, up in, you know, they're finally realizing, you know, Dad knows something. I'm going to call him up and get his advice on it. You know, they're finally realizing it. So that was when you shared that. I'm thinking to myself, like, you know what? Your kids are just like my kids. You know, but you know, let's move on. In fact, we had just covered Roman numeral 3, the laws concerning parents. Concerning is the fill-in. And then in letter A, don't curse or disrespect your parents. You know, I understand what you're saying, Felicia, because sometimes we, you know, we have little things like, you know, hey, lady, or, you know, something like that. Old woman? Yeah. You know, we got little things like that. Our kids laugh because of the little names we have for each other, you know, and, you know, so, but, you know, that isn't cursing or disrespecting your parent. Okay, and letter B, the punishment for cursing or hitting your parents is death. You know, and that's what it says. It says striking. I could understand, I mean, you know, people would say, well, cursing, you know, they're yelling at their parents. I don't like that. But one thing I really don't like is hitting. Yeah, the hitting part has got to stop, you know. And I remember one of our pastors sharing with us that he told one of the members of this congregation, you ever hit... Well, if you ever hit her again, I'm coming over and I'll take care of you. Yeah, you know, and that's how I feel. You know. Yeah. And he never hit her again.
So we're gonna come rearrange your face.
Yeah.
That was in the counseling room.
Yeah.
And he listened.
Yeah.
He understood that.
Well, you have, you know, there's some, yeah, but it's wonderful that here you go to a memorial service and you meet up with a former member of our congregation and you prophesied over him, and it's wonderful the way our Lord works. It's so wonderful. He doesn't have to tell us that he's working on this person. All we do is we deliver a message, but then he confirms it. That's outstanding, you know, especially he's been walking with the Lord now for 7 years.
And he started the recovery group at Lake Gregory Church.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, praise God. But you know, in Exodus 22, it says, you shall not allow a sorceress to live. Well, sorceress, we were talking about that earlier, Tila, and we said it seems like they're all for the men. This one seems like it's for the women, but it's not. They're not for the men or for the women. They're for everyone, okay? Whoever has sexual intercourse with an animal must be put to death. That should be an obvious. And anyone who sacrifices to any god other than the Lord shall utterly be destroyed. All of these prohibition laws I just mentioned carry the death penalty. Okay, I have a cousin that out of the blue got a hold of me, and her mother, my uncle, it was my mother's brother. But her mother, she was one of the so she was Native Indian, but she was also like the daughter of the witch doctor and stuff like that, something like that. But in other words, she was, and this girl growing up, she grew up with her mom because my uncle, he died, but she got a hold of me through that ancestry. Said, you may not know me, my name is da whatever, and I said, oh my gosh, I got a hold of her and I said, you're my cousin. She said, well, can you tell me anything about my dad? So I told her about her dad. She said, well, I'm a, what was it, diviner or diviner. I'm a diviner. I'm taking after my mom and this and that. And I said, oh my gosh. So I prayed for her.
She didn't like it.
She didn't like it, and we've never heard from her again. I said, you're not honoring God anywhere here. Well, she's not, so, but in other words, that wasn't allowed in this time. In this time, if you did anything like that, you would be put to death. And then several...
Balaam was a sorcerer.
He was a sorcerer, absolutely. Oh, were you going to share something? I'm sorry, Paul.
I was just going to say, one of the things we kind of skip over, a lot of things we consider to be absolutely abhorrent, and so we skip over them like, oh, that absolutely. But all of this stuff that's in here is common. Mm-hmm. Common among people. May not be common among your family, but it's common among people. And sex with animals, that is not uncommon, even here in the United States. That is not uncommon. And so, we go, oh, that's disgusting. But
It is disgusting.
well, but it's very common. But it's very common, unfortunately. And, third world countries, even more so. Even more so. Islam especially. I mean, you're going to love this one.
What's that?
That's the speaker you were referring to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
When they talk
We're
about
showing the
sheep,
video, yeah.
When they talk about sheep, sheep are described
I
as being...
only went one paragraph. I wanted to get in and get out of there,
Get out of there. Sheep are described as being more like a human than any other animal. So, I mean, how do they know that?
Right.
How do they know that?
No. Go ahead, Sharon.
Well, there's actually a troubling section in Scripture where Nathan the prophet is talking to King David, and he talks about a man has one sheep, takes it to bed with him, and it's like, why would he take it to bed with him? I mean,
That was Gene Wilder.
Want to keep warm at night.
so anyway, there is, I don't know.
Do you remember the band Three Dog Night?
Yeah.
Do you remember why they were called Three Dog Night? Three Dog Night means it's a cold, very cold night. And they would sleep with their masters, to keep them warm.
Yeah.
But that's different than...
Yeah, I know it. I'm trying to... But no, I know what verse you're talking about. I didn't even want to go there, but...
But see, we like to skip over it because we
no,
don't
you're
want
right.
to touch that subject.
Yeah.
But that subject is strong enough. God put it in His Word
Yeah.
because it is a problem.
Well, you know what? And we wouldn't even cover this if we were most likely in a Christian congregation. This would be, none of this. You're right. Pastor Bruce.
And what Pastor Paul said is so right. This is common to man because of the fall.
Yeah.
I mean, I've done deliverance ministry for 30 plus years, and I haven't heard anything new in probably 20 years. And I hear it all. I hear animals having sex with angels, doing this, that, demons, doing that, this, that, and the other. I haven't heard anything new in 20 years. This is common stuff.
That's why it's in here.
We're fallen.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
the world, the creation is fallen. We're so fallen, there's no chance of ever getting back outside of God.
Yeah.
It'll never happen.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. If we want to return to Eden, the only way we're going to get there is through God.
Well, listen, we always skip over this part too. When God was looking for a mate for Adam.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Paul.
went through all of the animal kingdom looking for an acceptable and did not find one.
Farmer Paul.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's an understanding there that the rabbis say he went through all the animals and, so I don't know, but
I wasn't there, so I don't know.
okay, let's move on. Several verses later, the painful experiences of the Israelites in Egypt are highlighted, this time to show how the Israelites should care for the foreigner. God commands the Israelites that the foreigners are to be treated with kindness and respect. And that's in Exodus 22:21. You shall neither mistreat a stranger, some of your versions there would say foreigner, nor oppress him, for you were strangers or foreigners in the land of Egypt. Exodus 22:21. This particular command is applicable for us today, just as it was for the Israelites back when God gave them this command. I mean, I even shared that last year I shared when I did this parashah. I don't know if it was last year or the year before, but I shared how even our Peggy, my children, my grandchildren, some of them, in fact, probably even some of you that are here today, you have been mistreated in this country, even though you were born here, you're an American, and I shared, I remember hearing a speaker say that it's not so much the alien in the land, it's the color of the alien in the land, and they get mistreated. So, and I shared about the time I went with Peggy, and she went up to buy an ice cream, and they wouldn't sell it to her. They said they were closed. What do you mean they're closed? So then I go up there to get an ice cream, and she said, what kind of flavor would you like? Oh, I let her have it, and so it's just things like that, just little subtle things like that. It goes on today. Go ahead, Colette.
I was going to leave this alone because we've been all over, but in this parashah,
it covers all
this. It really
this,
does
yeah.
cover all of that.
Yeah.
I don't believe that the Israelites. Anyways, we depict the Israelites as if they look like our modern day Ashkenaz. Literally, an Israelite is not a color thing. It's the tribal thing. There's literally 12 brothers. They all have 4 different moms. They look different. They all look different, but they identify as being of Israel, even if they're a foreigner or if they come from the multitudes. Okay, there's a case today. I don't know if you guys have heard of this recent case of a guy who wanted to make Aliyah. He's a proselyte from Maryland, and he decided that because he wasn't getting a fair shake in the U.S., being a black man in the U.S., he had went through the prison system. He converted to Judaism right after he was let out of prison. He's been working he's like the picture of Tikkun Olam. Like if Tikkun Olam was a person, like he'd be the example, right? So he figured, okay, I'm Jewish, I'm gonna make Aliyah. He ended up going to the land like with a temporary visa. He went to yeshiva, all the whole nine. But every time he tried to make petition for Aliyah, it was like one thing or another where they literally they were messing him over like big time. And he ended up in like a hunger strike, and that's how he started to get people's attention, like this is what's going on with this issue.
Mhm.
So I listened to a podcast that one of the Israelis were doing about his case, and it just struck me that there really is nothing new. If you could say, okay, a Jew is not necessarily Jew in an ethnic sense, but is someone who ascribes to Judaism and all of the tenets of Judaism, and you could be a proselyte and still be of the people, then why are you doing all this right here?
Right.
So I would say, I only brought this up because somebody said that we're Christian. I don't necessarily believe that, because I don't believe that there's such a thing as a Christian as a modifier, like a Christian church, because it's not, a Christian is a noun, it's not an adjective. When we say when people come into this understanding of Torah observance, sometimes they go all the way to, I'm gonna convert to Judaism. You know, that's like a thing that happens, right? I would say not necessarily that you are of the people of God, and be content that your name is written in the book and that God knows who his people are,
Right.
rather than you being on the rolls of this shul or this yeshiva or whatever. That God, if you're in the family of God, God knows who you are, and be content with that.
Amen.
Rather than all of the applications and the petitions that we do to try to be recognized as one thing or another, in this strata, whatever, because there's all these different
Right.
categories people want to put you in.
Right. Okay.
I'd like
Oh,
to.
go ahead.
I'd like to say this. I'm thinking about identifying as a black woman so I can get assigned to the Supreme Court. I identify as a black woman, I should be qualified.
Yeah, that is, that's what I hear, that Pastor Bruce.
Let's keep that straight. I was gonna say, it's very interesting, it's very interesting, but a Jew cannot be defined.
That's right.
They're the only people group on planet Earth that nobody knows what to do with them. Because they're not an ethnicity, they're not a religion, they're not a society. They literally are so mixed in and so integrated with the entire world that when Hitler wanted to get rid of the Jews, he had to define them. And that's what he did, and that's where it boiled down. Even to today, we hold to Hitler's definition of a Jew, a parent or a grandparent. If you get past grandparent, you were safe in Nazi Germany, okay? And so this becomes, just like you said, Colette, nobody knows we don't know who belongs to God except for him. And I just laughed when somebody said this to me the other day, well, they don't look like a Jew. I don't know, well, there's Chinese Jews. What does a Jew look like?
You had to look at the propaganda.
Yeah, and that was Nazi too.
Yeah.
And so the Jews are this non-tangible group of people in the world, and nobody knows. And so we've taken the only definition that we really have from the one that wanted to murder them all.
Right.
I mean,
Isn't that
last week
amazing?
about how
Yeah.
it changed all the music.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, we are following Adolf Hitler to this day.
Yeah.
In so many arenas, it's amazing. Satan, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's amazing when you shared that, and it's like, why are we listening to this fool? But they did. Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Vince.
Okay, that's enough, Bill.
Whether you whether you're an evolutionist or you believe in God created, we all come from one stock. Even Newsmax magazine had a cover 25 years ago. It said Adam and Eve, talking about the first genetic human. And in India, in areas where they don't split up, you can have in the same family someone as black as night, black as coal, and somebody as white as the snow in the same family. 7 or 8 kids.
Right.
So once you understand the science, and I've never felt the problem when amongst believers, because everybody kind of understands. But when it gets outside of that, we kind of got to figure out, who's who and where do we belong and where do we fit and all that.
Yeah.
And it gets really messy. I was pretty offended by a Newsweek magazine had a article, African American superstars. Well, we're playing into that same game. I know a white guy that was born in South Africa.
Oh yeah.
And I had a good black friend in aviation school that was pretty offended by the term because he was from Jamaica, and he didn't feel he had any tie to Africa.
Yeah.
So it just, well, we all came out of Africa.
No, I know what you're saying.
No matter whether you believe or.
No, I worked with a gentleman one time, and what nationality are you? And he said, I'm African. He's as white as can be. Well, I was born and raised in South Africa, so what is he? He's African, Go ahead, Peggy. Oh, Kent? Unmute yourself, Kent.
Yeah, am I unmuted?
Yep, yes you are.
Okay, great. Being a Messianic Jew, one thing you learn, that you learn, of course, Yeshua is the Messiah, but one story you keep hearing and nonstop, constantly, it's like brainwashed in your brain, is the prodigal son story.
Right.
And honestly, all my life, I always thought, for example, in my family, that my brother was the working brother, right? And I was the bad guy. And since the prodigal son story, and this is only within the last 4 years or something, I have a reverse feeling about it. And to me, the prodigal son story is kind of like the government we have today. It says the guy who was loyal to his father for all the time, right, is yet not given credibility, is condemned. And the son who didn't really do anything except go away and have fun, right, and then come back penniless, is given all this glory. You see, honor. Sorry, I'm using the wrong word.
Yeah, it's okay.
But it's kind of reverse to all of the things we've been saying about commands and respect and honor. Yet the brother in that story, which is like a Christian virtue, the prodigal son story, Jews never tell that story. I never heard a Jew even know that story.
Well, they don't.
Yeah, but
It's
the
in
idea,
Yeah.
was that? Yeah.
Yeah, because it's in the Bri Hadashah.
Right. So that story is like a reverse to everything we've been saying. It's kind of like the government today. It's sort of like stay home and get paid. It's like, I'm just telling you, only in the last few years that I know the result with the brother on that story. Do I even have a conflict with my brother in my brain? Not personally.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip forward and go to Exodus 23. And I don't know if everybody wants to hit on, in Roman numeral 4, we're going to talk about the prohibition of boiling a kid in its mother's milk. Okay, it's found 3 times in Torah. So you may have your ideas about this verse, but let's read on it. Let's read it. The first time we read it, it's in Exodus 23:14. Is it 19? Okay. Well, no, yeah, it's in 19. It begins in 14. It talks about the feast, the three festivals. But in 19, at the end of it, just it says, "You are not to boil a young goat in the milk of its mother." Okay, and then again, oh, I had it written down. Exodus 34:26. So let's go to Exodus 34:26. In Exodus 34:26, it says, "You shall bring the first of the first fruits of your soil into the house of the Lord your God, and then you shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk." So here again, it's identical to what we just read. But now let's go to Deuteronomy 14:21. That's the third place where it appears. So in 14:21 it says, "You shall not eat anything which dies of itself. You may give it to the alien who is in your town." Here, eat of this, so that he may eat of it. Or you may sell it to a foreigner. They don't know what they're going to buy, so hey, just give it to the foreigner. "For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk." So here it appears a third time. So let's go over this. I will focus on verse 19, which says, "You shall bring the choice," that says, "You are not to boil a young goat in the mother's milk." You are not to boil a young goat in the milk of its mother. This is the latter part of verse 19. In order to understand what that means, we need to read the preceding verses of Exodus 23, where God talks about the feast. So he talks about, beginning in Exodus 23:14, "3 times a year you shall celebrate a feast to me." In the following verses, God mentions the feast. They are the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of the Harvest, which is the Feast of First Fruits, and the Feast of Sukkot, the Feast of Ingathering. In verses 18-19, God explains a bit about what is to be done during each of these feasts. Verse 18 talks about, not offering the blood of his sacrifice with leavened bread, meaning that you're not to have leavened bread during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's a prohibition. Verse 19 speaks about bringing your choice first fruits and its requirement for the Feast of First Fruits. In the same verse comes another prohibition that says when you gather together the Feast of Ingathering, that is, the offering of your sacrifice or the sacrificial meal, you should not boil in the milk of its mother, or in what is the verse saying. The halakha of separating meat and milk is based upon 3 different scriptures in Torah, and we just read them: Exodus 23:19, Exodus 34:26, and Deuteronomy 14:21. The 2 in Exodus are very alike. Okay. However, in Deuteronomy 14:21, it differs from both, and it seems like that is where the rabbis are getting their understanding. It's like they disregard what it says in Exodus, but in Deuteronomy, they are considering this a part of the food laws that were given to Israel. They are a holy people. You are a holy people to the Lord. You're not supposed to be like the pagans, so you're not supposed to do things that are unclean. I've read that "in the milk of" can be understood in 2 ways. One way is the word "in," as in the milk of. The second way is the word "with," as with milk of. In other words, the kid or the lamb cannot be boiled in its mother's milk, nor nursing with its mother's milk. But in Leviticus 22 and in Exodus 22, Torah requires that the firstborn sheep should remain with its mother for 7 days, then be offered on the 8th day. Obviously, the animal is still nursing. So to prohibit the offering of a kid or a lamb with the milk of or still a suckling would contradict Torah. And because of that, boiling or cooking a kid and the lamb of its mother's milk just does not mean while it's still suckling. So I have a problem with this, and the reason is because of the rabbi's understanding. But hear me out. Some have said that the boiling a kid in its mother's milk may be considered to mean boiling in the fat. But in my research, I couldn't find any evidence or historical background to indicate that it means fat and not milk. So I think we're talking about milk. We're not talking about fat.
Milk's fat, mostly fat.
Well,
Milk has
is
fat
it?
in
It has fat in it? I think we should go much deeper to understand Exodus 23:19 to say that to go along with that we can't have cheeseburgers is not an acceptable answer. That's where they get it from. The cheese and the meat together. If we remember the food laws, they pertain to clean and unclean food. These food laws were given to the Jews to set them apart, as I said, because they are a holy people. So,
Pastor, one thing about this.
Oh, use your, yeah.
One thing about that, we always talk about how it separates.
Right.
But actually, all of these laws are to unify. It separates from that group over there, but it unifies the group that God has called. And I think that's one thing we have to keep in our mind, that God does all of this, the dietary rules, all of these rules, to unify His people. And sometimes when we focus on the separation, we miss the point that He is bringing like we talk about separating sheep from sheep.
Right.
Well, He's bringing always a more unified, specific people together to accomplish what He wants to have accomplished.
Right.
And it is a unification thing. Yeshua said, he was the most observant man in the world as far as Torah goes. And he said, the last thing, one of the things he's saying, he said, "Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness."
Right.
And that's really all about unification. He said,
Right.
Everybody doing this, that's one thing, but those that are God's people, this is what we're doing.
Right. Right. And when you look into this, I don't know how many of you have looked into this verse. It was the emergence of the rabbis that developed the rabbinic law to separate meat from dairy. One thing we have to think about, though, is that very little is ever mentioned from the rabbis about Abraham serving meat and milk to his guests in Genesis 18, 1 through 8. Okay? The rabbis may argue that the interpretation and application of prohibiting the eating of meat and dairy together wasn't in practice because at the time rabbinical Judaism wasn't developed yet. And what does that tell you? Exactly. I mean, it's like it's okay to do it back then, but now you can't do it. So that's where, go ahead, Sharon, and then I'll go on.
We've gone over this before, but to me, it says there are five different levels of meaning to God's word. And of course, it's the basic one is the bashat. But I think in each of these verses, it says in its mother's milk. Okay, the rabbis disregard that. So it's specific. It's very specific. And God gave mammals the ability to nourish its young through milk. And it's life-giving to the young kid or the young whatever it is,
right.
Even a young human, life-giving. And I think really the meaning is you don't turn something God has created for life and for good into a means of death.
Right, right.
So
yeah. And when you start talking about their arguments, you're absolutely right. That is one of the arguments. But we have to get back. In chapter 23, 14 to 19, we're talking about the three major festivals. And then out of nowhere, you are not to boil a young goat in the milk of its mother. Okay? Ramban, Maimonides, in his Guide of the Perplexed, chapter 348, suggested that this could have been a pagan ritual, but there is no evidence of this. What does boiling a kid in its mother's milk have to do with the sacrifices or the first fruit offerings? Rabbi Joseph ben Isaac Bechor Shor from the 12th century, he believed that the phrase is, as it's classically understood, is a mistranslation. In fact, Bechor Shor argues the verse has nothing to do with cooking a kid in its mother's milk or with cooking milk and the meat together. He believed the phrase should be understood as a poetic way of expressing the requirement to bring the firstborn animals to God as soon as possible. You got 7 days, then bring the animal to the Lord. This is what he says. What he's saying is there is an idea that when some of the people brought their sacrifices to the temple, let's just say it was wheat, their bowls would be filled with older wheat with a small layer of the fresh wheat on top. This phrase then meant to bring the calf as soon as the required date was over and don't delay. This idea may hold up well in both verses of Exodus, but in Deuteronomy it doesn't hold nothing. Yeah, because the passage in Deuteronomy seems to be associating this rule with the rules of forbidden foods. So, I mean, we may never get to the bottom of this, but it's just odd how in Exodus we are talking about the festivals, and then this is mentioned. So one thing they do believe, or what he believes, it's actually a Jewish idiom. Is that idiom that it's something that was understood way back in ancient times, and when you read something like this, what you were saying is bring your first fruit offering to the temple at the proper time and don't mess up with it. So that is, but like I said, that may hold true in the 2 verses in Exodus, but it doesn't say that in Deuteronomy. I see you, Colette. I just want to get my thoughts out there, because if I don't, I'll forget. So go ahead now, Colette.
Well, you said it a second time, that's why I was like, hey. You were saying it doesn't really have anything to do with the Deuteronomy text, and I have to disagree, because whenever I see a passage that's
the first fruit?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Whenever I see a passage or anything that's referenced more than once, like say this time it's 3 times.
Right.
I always look to see what is before and after.
Right.
Well, in the Deuteronomy passage, it starts talking about after, because there's chiasms in the scripture.
Right.
So if it starts out with the bringing of the fruits of the offering, and then it says this phrase, and then if you go down somewhere else where it says this phrase, and then it starts talking about the offering, then you know that it might be part of a chiasm. At least that's the way that I try to study or try to see where God has put patterns in the scripture. Well, right after that, it starts talking about
the tithe,
the offerings, right?
Yeah.
So I tend to believe maybe it's part of a chiasm. I don't know. I haven't studied it out. But I always say, okay, if it's not before, which is a parallelism, then it might be after, which is a chiasm.
Right.
And in this case, I believe it could be part of a chiasm because of the way that it says, okay, here's this exact phrase, and then it starts talking about the tithes.
Right. You see, and I just wanted you all to think about it, because you hit on it, that, when you're talking about the festivals, then you have something like this in there. There's got to be a truer meaning of this phrase, but we may go right back to the first level of understanding, and it may just very well mean, don't cook the kid in its mother's milk, But it's just something to think about, everyone. Go ahead,
I
Colette.
had a second observation, because when we talk about it being included in the dietary laws because of it being included,
Right.
like it's after all of these things that have to do with dietary things. Well, there's a way of, when you look at it, say, okay, Abraham offered, it was meat, there was meat and dairy there, so what's that about?
Yes.
It seems as if Judaism is kind of like this evolution, like they're going to be like, okay, we made this thing up and now we're going to develop it to the nth degree, to the point where if you're in a house and you see two dishwashers, you'll know, okay, these people were serious about the rabbinic separation, even to the point where Kathleen is saying you could have two different kitchens because you don't want the meat to touch, like be in the same kitchen with.
Yeah.
They can take things so far where I have to be like, okay, come on now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, that, and like I said, I just want to put it out there. So in letter A of 4, there's 3 arguments, okay? The 3 arguments are it was a Canaanite ritual, okay? And that, like I said, there's no evidence found that this is something that the pagan nations used to do. The second one, the Father is teaching us respect. Respect is the fill-in. It's cruel and inhumane to do this, okay? But then the third argument is first fruits idiom. Do not delay bringing your offering. Okay, Pastor Bruce?
I was just going to say, I've kind of noticed through the years, we talk about the 4 levels of interpretation of Scripture. It seems to me that typically Judaism focuses on the Peshat, on the literal level. This is why they strain at gnats, because that's where their focus is. The Christian church, on the other hand, jumps right to sod on everything, and they spiritualize everything. The Sabbath day is any day you want to make it. Just keep one day holy. The tithe is just give whatever you can give hilariously. So these are the 2 extremes of the biblical faith, the Judaism and the Christianity, and people are extremists always, and so you find the Jews leaning towards the Peshat, and the Christians lean into the sod, and I see that as a very general rule that I've just noticed over the years.
Right.
I agree.
Okay, Pastor Paul?
One of the things about that, and the reason why that is really, is because Israel had no concept of an afterlife. Mm-hmm. At this point, they did not worry about what would happen after they died. Their whole deal was, I need to please God today while I'm alive, because when I'm in the grave, it's over.
Right.
And see, the Christians, they had the whole concept of heaven. So we're all about, okay, we're going through this world, but we're really focused on over there.
Right.
And see, that's the difference between the first and the second word that we have, if you will.
Right.
Is the concept of what matters the most right now.
Right.
That's why we need the one new man. We
Amen.
need both sides.
It's both, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Otherwise you're out of balance.
Go ahead, Bill.
I'm not Martha Stewart, but who boils milk?
Do you ever eat biscuits and gravy?
Only if you're making.
No. No.
A cream sauce, if you're making cream sauce.
You boil it?
Well,
You ruin the milk when you boil it.
No,
Well,
I
don't scald it, you're gonna boil it.
You bring it
Huh?
to some,
But-
you have to boil the milk.
Really?
You see,
I withdraw my statement.
hey,
I've never boiled milk.
hey, you didn't get an answer from me, so I'm not Martha Stewart.
Don't make homemade macaroni and cheese.
You don't boil the milk, so it ruins it.
No, you don't bring it to boil, but
Yeah.
Were you gonna share something?
Simmer.
No, I was just.
Simmer. It's not necessarily
You
boil.
can't win this one, Bill.
No, I don't have a,
Yeah.
I don't have a goat in this race.
Okay, because I know we're getting right to the end. We have Torah or yeshiva coming right up. So let me give you Roman numeral 5. Moses, Aaron, and the elders have a meal with God. And then I ask a question. Did they really see God's face and live? Because in chapter 24, Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 elders go up to with the Lord, and they have a meal with him. Okay, and
12:10, you're gonna ask this question.
what's that?
12:10, you're gonna ask this question.
12:10.
We can't jump in.
Yeah, that's it. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, because it's getting late. You know what? And if I recall, we didn't finish this chapter 2 years ago.
Exodus 23, Exodus 23:20 actually reveals something that we have to never forget. And it says, "Behold, I'm going to send an angel before you to guard you along the way and to bring you into that place which I have prepared." God uses his creation to represent him and manifest himself.
Read the next 2 verses.
He on your guard before him and obey his voice. Do not be rebellious toward him, for he will not pardon your transgression, for my name is in him. But if you truly obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries.
My name is in him.
Who is he talking? He's saying, I'm going to send this angel and he's going to be my rep.
Right.
And what he
right.
says, you better pay attention to him and do, because he is me right there in front of you.
Yeah. But you figure this is as they're going through the land, through the wilderness, making their way to the promised land. But what I was talking about was right there having a meal with the Lord. You know, that, were you going to say something, Tila?
Yes, because because I was gonna ask the same question. I always look at this one scripture down in verse 10, and they saw the God of Israel.
And, yes.
And there was under his feet, as it were, a paved, I don't have my glasses on, I'm sorry, of sapphire stone, and it was like the very heavens in its clarity.
Yes, yes. And like you said, they saw the God of Israel. Did they see Yeshua?
That's what I meant. What did they
yeah.
see?
Yeah.
Oh boy, I love this one.
They also kind of focus in on the floor. It's
Yes.
almost as if their head is down and they're afraid to look. It's like when the women cover their eyes when we light the Shabbat candles. It's the same concept.
Right.
That, you light the candles and even though you're covered your eyes, you can still see the light, but you're not looking at the candles.
Right, right.
And so they're looking at the ground. It seems to be a contextual part of this.
And they would know, and then, they would know that nobody has seen the Lord and lived. So, I like that probably best because to look upon him, it's just like when Moshe at the, when they shield him. So, okay, Pastor Paul.
Yeah, now I love this part because the whole concept of why we shield our eyes is based on this idea that nobody can look upon God and live. And yet, with Abram, when he is dining with these men that came, we realize they're angels because it's identified right after that when they all show up down in Sodom and do what they're doing. Well, but for us, when we're doing the Shema or doing whatever we're doing, you know, a lot of people cover their eyes and bow their head thinking that who's going to appear is God, Yahweh.
Amen.
But he is not going to appear. It is Yeshua who's going to appear. And the scripture says about him, lift up your eyes from where does our help come from? And
Right.
it says every eye will see him.
See him. That's right.
See, and
That's
so
right.
it's a Jewish tradition to do this, but on the other side of the coin, when you read the text, you realize you're to lift up your eyes to see him as he comes.
Right.
So, you know, for me, it's like, am I going to follow the tradition or am I going to consider who am I looking to see? If every eye can see him, I would like to be first.
Yeah. And that is our Torah study for today.